Alrighty, y'all, we got even more questions about JJK 264, so strap in and spoilers beware. All right, so we're kicking things off with Daniel today, who's got a few questions and theories for me. And let me get out the way so y'all can pause to read this, because this was a long comment, and we actually have two other screenshots of the comment as well. But to kick things off, Daniel says that he thinks Yuji and Sukuna could be within Yuji's innate domain right now, that Yuji pulled Sukuna into it, and it could be a nice little full circle moment to how that happened earlier in the manga where Yuji was pulled into Sukuna's innate domain. So I could certainly see that. It does make sense for it to be an innate domain, and I'm not sure if you've seen my recent videos on the train station. I've had a lot of different ideas, but for right now, I think it's more of an airport Gojo scene. But even if it is that type of thing, it could still very well be an innate domain. So we'll have to see. There's been a ton of ideas floating around there, and really, I think a lot of them have merit. But next he asks, besides Yuji, who was engineered by Kenjaku specifically as a vessel, is the incarnation of a sorcerer in a vessel irreversible? And this is tough to say. It's something that's been touched on a little bit, especially in Angel and Hannah's story, where Angel views these incarnated sorcerers as abominations because they essentially snuff out the original host, which is why Angel, lives kind of, symmetrically is not the word I'm looking for. Symbiotically. Is that the word? I don't know. But with Angel not fully taking over Hannah, right? So I think in most cases it probably is irreversible. But here we have Yuji trying to reverse that with Megami, right? That's everyone's goal right now. So I don't think it's impossible. I think we're getting shown that it is possible if you have the right tool set. A la somebody like Yuji who can specifically cleave the barrier between people's souls, and also Jacob's Ladder, which can help dissolve that barrier. So I would say in most cases it probably is irreversible, but it's not impossible. And then for your next couple of questions, what is Maki doing now? Where is Yuta? What are the rest of these people doing? And honestly, your guess is as good as mine. Last we saw Maki, she got clapped away by Todo to protect her from the furnace effect. Yuta, I imagine, is still lying on the ground, unable to do anything. But as far as for what the team's doing, it's hard to say if it's part of the plan that they've kind of stayed back for now, or if they're just still making their way back or recuperating or whatever the case may be. Gege, through the characters, has kind of kept us in the dark on what the grand plan with Sukuna is, so it's hard to say what the exact motivations there are. We'll see when we see, I suppose. And then what was Kenjaku's plan for Yuji, besides being the vessel for Sukuna? Great question. That's one of the more interesting mysteries of the show, I think, still remaining here. Because was Yuji simply just a vessel for Sukuna, or did Kenjaku have greater plans for him that he's kept close to the chest? Could it revolve around the merger? It's hard to say. We know that Kenjaku has kind of given different answers to us at different points in the story. Sometimes saying that, Yuji's role has been fulfilled, other times saying that, he's the eye of the storm of the new age. So personally, I think Yuji is more important than just being Sukuna's vessel, but it's one of those things we'll have to see. Now, Daniel's next question is a long one, so y'all pause to read it, and it actually continues in the next screenshot as well. But in a nutshell, it deals with this idea that Gojo maybe even let himself pass away in those final moments, and that also he knew Sukuna was watching him in the airport. The same way Sukuna was present in Jogo and Kashimo's kind of limbo scenes. Daniel is saying Gojo maybe knew Sukuna was in his, and so he was lying to kind of trick Sukuna. And I personally don't subscribe to this because I don't think that is necessary. I don't think we need to make a reason for Gojo to have been lying in those scenes. I think it makes sense for him to just have been earnest there, and he's just grappling and wrestling with his final moments in his life, right? And I think Gege would have drawn Sukuna or given us some clue that Sukuna was watching in that scene, if that's the takeaway we were supposed to have. But Daniel goes on to say that Gojo could come back as a sage, kind of the antithesis of a vengeful cursed spirit, like an entity that is born of pure positive cursed energy that returns. And this is a really cool idea because the term sage has been thrown around rather cryptically at points in this manga, specifically Hanami when she's about to take out, I think, Todo and Yuji, is go on to become sages. But I don't think it literally means this other type of entity. But I do think, if Gojo were to come back, then it would be kind of this second enlightenment. And so in that way, he could be, a sage and kind of have, this power up, if we want to call it that. But I don't think he would be of a brand new form. Like, again, not this positive cursed energy, the other side of the coin of a vengeful spirit type of thing. But really cool ideas. And then finally, Daniel wants to know about my thoughts on this only one lives versus only one dies statement from Gege. And I actually put out a video on this maybe a couple weeks ago, so I'm going to link that down in the description below if you'd like to check it out. Next up, we got this question from Ghosty on the inverted spear of heaven. He thinks it could be a broken piece of Heighten, Sukuna's weapon, because he thinks it's weird they call it the inverted spear when it's clearly a dagger in the way Toji uses it, and it also looks like it was a trident that had a piece broken off, which Sukuna's weapon looks like a trident. So I'm totally with you that the inverted spear certainly seems to be part of a larger weapon at one point, and it certainly was a trident as well. I've put out a longer video talking about the inverted spear before where I go into some of that stuff, but I've never talked about it potentially being heightened, so that's certainly interesting. I don't know if there's any evidence that really points to that per se, other than both things presumably being tridents, but it's a really cool idea. Next up, we got this one from Kokarn, who says, do I think the most recent Jacob's Ladder was weak, not just because Hannah was missing an arm, but because that missing arm makes it harder for her to blow her horn or her trumpet, whatever it is? And 100% absolutely. This is an astute observation because she plays that trumpet every time she does Jacob's Ladder, and missing an arm makes it far more difficult to play that trumpet. So I think that makes perfect sense and helps explain why that was so much weaker than her previous ones. Next up, we got this one from Kohax, who says that he has a theory that Yuji knew the domain at the beginning of the fight, so why would he wait to use it? And his idea was to save Megami, and essentially because he needed to wait for Sukuna to heal Megami's heart before they did the rest of their business. And I really like that idea in terms of the narrative symmetry with earlier in the story and what happened with Yuji, but I don't think it's the case, only because I don't think they would have played with people's lives like that, and I think there is some plan they have in mind, even if Megami's heart were to be completely destroyed. There's been a couple moments, like even back to the Gojo fight, where he talks about all the damage he's going to do specifically to the organs. Like, I'm going to take out your heart and your kidney next. And Yuji makes a similar statement right before Yuta Gojo shows up about, like, first I'm going to take his heart and then yada yada yada. So I don't think that he would wait for the domain for that reason, but he could have waited for other reasons. I still don't think Yuji would have had it before the Sukuna fight, because I think he only would have unlocked it after that series of black flashes where he awakened Shrine. But he maybe had it a little bit earlier than we saw it, and he was waiting for maybe to be alone with Sukuna. Maybe he can't target people specifically in the domain and would have hurt others around him or something like that. But yeah, I guess we're just going to have to wait and find out more about the domain itself, and maybe we can piece some of these things together. Next up, we got a couple questions from Admir. This first one is, why does Sukuna require a living host to be able to inhabit the body, whereas Kenjaku can do it with a deceased host? And the reason is what you allude to here. It's because Kenjaku is body swapping with his curse technique, which just operates differently than cursed object incarnation. And it seems to be that Kenjaku's technique requires a deceased person. So that's the main difference there. And then for your second question, when Yuta ordered Rika to consume Kenjaku, would Rika also have gotten access to Geto's curse technique? And really interesting. The short answer is we don't know. He might have gotten access to Geto's technique, Kaori's technique, all the techniques that were in Kenjaku's brain, right? But even if he did, he would not have access to the abilities and cursed spirits that Kenjaku had consumed. Because as we saw, those all were freed as soon as Kenjaku passed away. And specifically Mahito, he was consumed all the way back in Shibuya when Kenjaku used Uzumaki to extract the technique. So could Yuta have cursed spirit manipulation and anti-gravity? Maybe, but he wouldn't have the cursed spirits even if he did. Next up, T-Man is begging for a Heian era flashback, and I'm right there with you, man. But he also wants to know if I think JJK is over after this. And if you mean the train station and this immediate battle with Sukuna, then no, I don't think so. I think there's still way too much to kind of unravel and unpack to just be done in the next couple of chapters. Like, we're in the end game clearly, but we're not at the end yet. So I think there's stuff with the merger. I would love to see a broken binding vow like you mentioned here, but just whatever the case may be, there's still stuff to do before this wraps up. Next, Steven cooked up this idea for what Yuji's domain could be, and essentially the person is given a choice. Go north to change who you are, go south to stay who you were. And if they choose south, Yuji then turns on the sure hit effect and basically demolishes them. So really cool idea, but I'm still leaning that this isn't his domain for now. Next up, we got another theory on Yuji's domain from JJ, who says, what if the sure hit effect is a targeted cleave at the soul or at the barrier between the souls combined with a reversal that then merges Sukuna's soul back with Yuji? And I don't think this is lobotomized at all. I think this is basically exactly what's happening. It's just a question of, does it happen in this specific way? I do agree with you that the sure hit effect is almost certainly a targeted cleave at the soul where he's going to finish splitting Sukuna and Megami. I think the question comes with, is he using a reversal to then grab the soul and attach it to himself? You know, cleave splits things apart. Maybe the reversal does bring things together. So perhaps that's exactly how it happens, but I think there is room for other ways to kind of like re-get Sukuna attached to him. Maybe he ate the fingers if they got spit up or something. But yeah, not lobotomy, man. I think this is pretty much what we're going to see. Next up, we got a couple questions from Sam, starting with, in the Gojo airport scene, everyone there was confirmed deceased. So does that mean Yuji is deceased since he's in the train station? And maybe. I think it would make a lot of sense if he was, and so that's why he's there, but he doesn't have to be, because we do have precedent where Sukuna showed up in Jogo and Kashimo's afterlife scenes, and he wasn't deceased, so maybe Yuji isn't either. And then for your second question, you're wondering, why isn't Sukuna using soul punches or soul cutting slashes in this fight? And this is tough. I think the answer is we really don't have enough information to say one way or the other, because one, we still don't fully understand the type of damage that Yuji's soul punches do. Like, I don't know if we can equate that to like the same way that the soul split katana damages necessarily, because people do seem to be able to heal from Yuji's punches like in the past, even though he was doing soul damage, and those people didn't necessarily have soul RCT. So Sukuna might already be doing that extra damage if we want to think about it that way. But also, you know, Yuji's primarily using it in this fight to split the souls, which is obviously something Sukuna is not concerned with doing against any of his opponents. So not a good answer for you. I apologize, but the reason is we just really don't have enough information. Next up, got a couple questions from Callie here. The first is just a recommendation to check out Chainsaw Man after I catch up on One Piece. And I know so many people have told me to get into that. It is on my list of things to check out, but like you mentioned, my primary focus is tackling the beast of One Piece right now. And once I get at least further along in that, I am going to start picking up some other stuff too. Next up, Callie's second question is a bit longer, so y'all need to pause to read it, and it's also hard for me to kind of encapsulate what the question is, but it's essentially a pushback against me on defending Gege's writing and defending the Sukuna cycle, let's call it. And, recently I talked about how some people were upset that the Jacob's Ladder didn't do anything, but I wasn't, because I didn't expect that to kill Sukuna in the first place. So just a rebuttal to these things where Callie is pointing out here. So a couple of things I'll address here is that you first say it seems like I agree with the criticisms and I'm just not mad about it. And I would say there's a difference between understanding where people get criticized and agreeing with the criticisms, because I don't agree with those criticisms. I don't think the Sukuna cycle is something to be criticized, and I don't think, not that it like is beyond criticism. I'm just only speaking personally here, because again, this is subjective and everyone's welcome to interpret and have their own feelings about the story. Again, don't blame anybody that does have criticisms with this, but I don't. Just like I don't have a criticism of the Jacob's Ladder not defeating Sukuna, because I think you can kind of equate that to like just knowing story structure in a way, and like that there can still obviously be tension and stakes without the death of a character involved. So similarly, like let's say you're watching the first 10 minutes of a Batman movie. You know Batman's not going to die in those first 10 minutes. In the same way, you know Joker's not going to die in the first 10 minutes, because that's the bad guy. They're going to have their final showdown at the end of the movie. So similarly, I knew that Jacob's Ladder wasn't going to be the thing that defeats Sukuna, because there's still much that needs to happen within the story. So again, can other people be frustrated at that? Sure. And I'm not saying Gege is a perfect writer that made no flaws, but personally, I haven't had an issue with it. So I can recognize criticisms without agreeing with them. And, you know, I think there can be tension and stakes without the death of a character. And then saying I'm not pissed at the lack of the payoff because I simply accept that there won't be much one. Also feel like that's a mischaracterization of me. There wasn't a payoff in that moment. That doesn't mean there won't be a payoff later. And then the final thing I want to address is talking about the Gojo stuff. You're saying that I won't be satisfied with the story because I expect Gojo to come back if he doesn't come back. And I disagree because, and I don't know if you saw my most recent train station video, but it's never been about just wanting Gojo to come back to come back. It's about the things Gege established in the writing that led me to believe he was going to come back. So if Gojo just didn't come back, but those things were satisfied in other ways, then I would be perfectly happy with that. And I even talk about this in the train station video because Gege has now set it up to where Sukuna could be the answer to the North versus South question, which would then satisfy that thing he established back in 236 without Gojo ever coming back, and I'd be fine with that. However, an example of something I would be disappointed with and I would criticize is, let's say the story ended and the North versus South thing was never addressed again. And I would be like, wait, what? Why the hell did he put such an importance on that moment and establish that dichotomy only to completely ignore it? Then I would criticize that and I would say that's where he kind of messed up in his writing. But that's something I can't really analyze until the story is over because it's not over till it's over and we don't know what he's going to do, right? So again, you know, if Gege never cooks and we reach the end of this story, then sure, I'm there. If Gojo never comes back, I'm fine with that if those other things are addressed. It's just, you know, those things we can't really talk about until it's all said and done. This is a yapfest.com, but hopefully that addresses most of the things you were asking. Next up, we got this question from Palazzo on would RCT one-shot Mahito. That is so tough because we don't have very much evidence on how RCT actually interacts with curses. We saw Yuta take out the grasshopper guy with it, and we have that statement about the blade of extermination from Maharaga where Sukuna says this would have wiped me out. So, like, is it as easy as RCT just obliterates a cursed spirit regardless of their strength level? I find that hard to believe, and yet we have some pretty impressive examples of it being extremely powerful. So I don't know. I think RCT would need to completely destroy Mahito like rather quickly for him personally to not get destroyed by it, given how powerful he is and how defensive he is with his curse technique. But we really don't have a strong answer here on exactly how that interaction works. Next, speaking of Mahito, we got this question from DB who wants to know why Toto's simple domain didn't work against Mahito's domain expansion, and the answer is rather pretty simple. Toto wasn't fast enough. If you'll go back and watch that sequence, even though we see Toto do the simple domain first, it actually isn't what happened first. Mahito was faster, and so he opened the domain before Toto was able to get off his simple domain. And then his next question deals with Yuji and the domain and the memory stuff, some of which we've talked about in previous videos, but DB just wants to know if we'll get some sort of window into Sukuna's past via, you know, this memory stuff, whether it's related to Yuji's curse technique or just otherwise. And I think absolutely, at least I hope. I hope this train station is about to explore Sukuna's characterization and maybe give us a flashback or a glimpse into his past in some form. Now, is that because it's tied to Yuji's curse technique? I personally don't think so. I think this is more just a kind of looking back on the life than like an actual technique at play, but it could be, so we'll just have to see. Next, relating to this train station, Aiden says he thinks it's possible it could be Yuji's innate domain and he's somehow gotten his hands on that last finger, and him and One Finger Sukuna are about to fight against Megami Sukuna. And this is a really interesting idea. It would be cool to see like Sukuna in two places at once like that, but I don't think it's the case just because I think Sukuna would have an awareness and would know, like Megami Sukuna would have known that there was a piece of him within Yuji if that was the case. So I do think this is rather an after effect of whatever's happening with the domain. Again, more of an airport scene that has happened after he's lost potentially. So I don't think it's like a different iteration, One Finger iteration of Sukuna. I think it is like the main one still. But that being said, I absolutely love the idea of revisiting that pact and kind of having a full circle moment where maybe Yuji makes some sort of deal with Sukuna, or just, you know, what that would look like or what the deal would be. I don't know, but I would love that if that happened. Next up, got this question from Rondell, who wants to know if it's possible someone could shrink their domain down to the size of their body and basically wear it like an armor. And no, I don't think this specifically would be possible, but like we saw, Gojo was able to shrink his domain down to the size of a basketball. But if you shrunk it down to your body, you're kind of defeating the purpose of the sure hit effect because you want your opponent to be within it as well. I think the best you could do would be a domain amplification like armor in order to negate other people's effects. Next up, Isaiah wants to know, with everyone being more aware of cursed energy, the fight getting streamed out to a bunch of people, what effect is that having on sorcerers and cursed spirits? And what I'll say is, after Shibuya, obviously the cat's out of the bag more than it was, but I still don't think largely that like normal civilians have a good understanding of what cursed energy is and what actually is even going on. Meme is streaming out the fight, but I don't think that like just, every normal Joe has access to it. I do think it's broadened beyond the scope of just JJK's society, but it's still not completely mainstream. But even still, to answer your question on what effect would more people knowing about this have, I don't think it honestly has that much of an effect. I think if anything, people's awareness of cursed spirits and cursed energy in that way could lead to the birth of even more cursed spirits because they're going to be afraid of those things and produce more cursed energy. But I don't think it would really have an effect on sorcerers. I'm not sure if they would, at least that quickly in the timeline, also get a boost. The way I view it is like in terms of destiny and balance, like with Gojo being born, like the world was shifted. I think this is too small scale of an event to have really caused a shift that like characters would actually feel in the moment. Like I don't think, Gojo got a boost from the more awareness of it type of thing, if that makes sense. Next up, we've got this great analysis from Rengoku on Gojo, and it's a bit longer, so y'all pause to read it, but it deals with his mudra and the different symbolism and how it could be setting up for Gojo to come back, be truly enlightened, and truly discover who he is. And largely that's been a crux of a lot of the things I've talked about regarding a potential Gojo comeback. So I'm there with you, but I am of the belief now that Gege is paving other avenues to satisfy things in the story without necessarily a Gojo comeback in this way. But for my money, I still do think we will get a moment from Gojo, a la the Ghetto choking moment. Next, we got this from Isaac Scanlon, and if that's a Critical Role reference, shout out, my friend. But he's talking about what this train station could be and what it could represent, and thinks maybe he has kind of projected his innate domain over Sukuna's. So I do agree with you on basically what you say is the point of this domain and what will happen here. Teach him about love, and it's representative of no one being in Sukuna's life. So I'm right with you for all of that, but mechanically, whether or not like this is an afterlife limbo scene versus like an actual jujutsu technique that Yuji has intentionally projected onto Sukuna's, I don't know. And then Scanlon continues by saying that maybe the binding vow Yuji made to be able to target the barrier between the souls was to exchange his life if Sukuna were to pass away. And I'm certainly with you 100% that Yuji is going to do some sort of self-sacrificial play here, but I just don't know if it would have been tied to that specific binding vow. And finally, JoJo wants to know Toto versus Ryu. And I hate you for making me pick against my boy here, but I think I gotta go Ryu, mostly because he has the domain expansion. Yes, Toto could theoretically swap out of it, but like in terms of would he have enough time to, would he have something set up outside of the domain that he could even swap with necessarily? I don't know. I got a lot of faith in my boy, but if he's by himself, doesn't have another person to like swap and, facilitate with, then I think I gotta give it to Ryu just for the domain. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you to everyone who sent in a question. And also, thank you for all of the kind words that were included in those questions. I didn't address it each time because I didn't want to annoy you guys by saying it 15 times, but I really appreciate it. And y'all, thank you so much for watching.